In this video, we will study a very interesting game in which you will learn a typical endgame in the old Indian defense, which offers many winning chances for black. The game began with the moves d4, knight f6. Black develops his queen's knight to its natural square and takes control of the e4 square to prevent white from occupying the center with his pawns. White played c4, advancing his side pawn and placing it next to his center pawn to increase his control over the center squares. Black played d6, preparing to attack the center with e5 or c5. White played knight c3, developing his queen's knight and taking control of the e4 square, with the idea of advancing with e4 and forming a powerful pawn center. Black played e5, immediately attacking the opponent's pawn center. If white now advances with d5 to maintain his pawn center, black can play e4, gaining space in the center and preventing white from moving e4. Black can continue with moves like bishop f5, to strengthen the defense of the e4 pawn, g6, bishop g7, short castling, and rook e8, or queen e7, to further strengthen the defense of the e4 pawn. Black has very good play. In the game, after the move e5, white exchanged pawns with d takes e5. The game continued d takes e5. White played queen takes d8, check, exchanging queens to take away the right to castle from the enemy king. After king takes d8. Black has lost his right to castle but has very good options in the endgame. The c4 pawn hinders the movement of the white pieces and can be an attacking target for the black pieces. If white now plays bishop g5, pinning black's knight, black can play bishop e6, developing his queen's bishop and threatening to capture the c4 pawn. White can castle long, giving check. Black can play knight d7, defending against check and developing another piece. White can play knight f3, developing the king's knight and threatening to capture the e5 pawn. Black can play king c8, escaping from the pin, to defend the e5 pawn and prevent it from being captured. The black king remains on the queen side to defend the c7 pawn and prevent any possible knight attack on b5. White can attempt the move bishop takes f6 to weaken the opponent's pawn structure. But black plays g takes f6, recapturing with the pawn to keep the e5 pawn defended. The c4 pawn is still under attack. Black can continue with moves like c6 to limit the opponent's knight's moves, and king c7 to allow the queen's rook to enter the game. They can advance with a5 to attack the queen side, and they can also play rook g8 to take advantage of the g-file on the king side. Black has an advantage. In the game, after the move king takes d8, white played knight f3, developing his king's knight and threatening to capture the e5 pawn. Black played knight f to d7, defending the e5 pawn with this knight. Black's plan is to continue with f6 to strengthen the defense of the e5 pawn and limit the opponent's knight's mobility. If white now plays knight g5, threatening to capture the f7 pawn, black can play king e8, calmly defending the f7 pawn. They can then play h6 to force the opponent's knight back. If white now plays knight d5, threatening to capture the c7 pawn, black can simply respond with knight a6, defending the c7 pawn. They can then play c6 to force the opponent's knight to retreat. Black can also play h6 to force the other knight back. The white pieces have to retreat, and black has very good play. In the game, after the move knight f to d7, white played the bishop d2, developing his queen's bishop and preparing to castle longside. Black played f6, connecting his pawns, strengthening the defense of the e5 pawn, and taking control of the g5 and e5 squares to limit the opponent's knight's mobility. If white now plays e4, placing a pawn in the center. Black can play c6, taking control of the d5 and b5 squares, to limit the mobility of the c3 knight. The black king can move to the c7 square, where it will be very well placed. Black can advance with a5 to attack the queenside. The white pawns on e4 and c4 greatly interfere with the moves of the f1 bishop, and black has an advantage. In the game, after the move f6, white played e3, allowing the development of his king's bishop. White doesn't want to place his pawn on e4 so that it doesn't interfere with his own bishop's moves. Black played c6, taking control of the d5 and b5 squares to limit the mobility of the opponent's knight. At the same time, with this move, Black can move his king to the c7 square, where it will be very well positioned. White played the d3 bishop, completing the development of his minor pieces. Black played the c5 knight, activating his knight and threatening to capture the opponent's bishop. White played the c2 bishop to defend his bishop. Black played the e6 bishop, developing his queen's bishop and threatening to capture the c4 pawn. White played b3 to defend the pawn. Black played king c7, placing his king on a better square, where it will be perfectly safe. White castled kingside. Black played a5. A good move, typical in this type of position. Black takes control of the b4 square to secure his knight's position on the c5 square. Furthermore, the pawn is ready to advance at any moment to a4 and break White's queenside structure. White played rook f to d1, activating his king's rook and occupying the d-file, which is an open file. Black played bishop e7, developing his king's bishop. White played bishop e1, freeing up action for his rook along the d-file. Black played knight b to a6, completing the development of his minor pieces and connecting the rooks. Now, White played knight e4, with the idea of exchanging pieces to simplify the position. Now, the most accurate move for Black was knight takes e4, eliminating White's knight from the center. After bishop takes e4, Black can play bishop e4, invading with his bishop on the opponent's side, with the idea of exchanging the dark squared bishops and exchanging his bad bishop for the opponent's good bishop. Black has the advantage. In the game, however, after the move knight e4, Black played a4, attacking on the queen side. Now, the best move for White was knight g3, to avoid exchanges and allow the two black knights to interfere with each other. Since exchanging one of the knights favors the mobility of the black pieces. After, for example, knight d7, with the idea of invading with the bishop on b4, to exchange the dark squared bishops. White can play bishop f5, with the idea of exchanging his bad bishop for the opponent's good bishop. After bishop takes f5, knight takes f5. Black's bishop and the g7 pawn are under attack. Black can play bishop f8, to defend his bishop and simultaneously defend the g7 pawn. Black still has the advantage, but his attack is slower, and White has managed to get rid of his bad bishop and exchange it for Black's good bishop. In the game, after the move a4, White played bishop c3, with the idea of activating his bishop. Black played knight takes e4, eliminating White's knight from the center. The game continued bishop takes e4. Black played bishop e4, with the idea of exchanging the dark squared bishops to get rid of his bad bishop. Now, bishop b2 is not possible to prevent the bishop exchange, as Black can play a3, attacking the opposing bishop and forcing it to retreat. After bishop c1, Black can play rook a to d8, threatening to capture the opposing rook. After, for example, rook f1, Black can play g5, gaining space on the kingside. Black can follow up with moves like h5, rook d7, to double the rooks on the d-file. The white pieces can barely move, and Black has a clear advantage. In the game, after the move bishop b4, White played bishop e1 to defend his bishop. Black played bishop takes e1, exchanging the dark squared bishops. After knight takes e1, Black played f5, attacking the opposing bishop, with the idea of expelling it from the center and forcing it to retreat. White played bishop d3. Black played rook h to d8, activating his king's rook and occupying the d-file, which is an open file. White played bishop f1, retreating his bishop to a safer square and freeing up his rook to counter the opposing rook's action along the open file. Black played a takes b3, to open lines for attack. After a takes b3, Black played knight c5, threatening to capture the b3 pawn and freeing up action for his rook along the a-file. Now it's not possible to exchange rooks with rook takes a1, since Black plays rook takes d1, invading with his rook along the first rank, and black has an advantage. And if white captures the other rook with rook takes d1, black plays rook takes a1, invading with his rook along the first rank, and black is winning. After the move knight c5, white can play b4 to defend the pawn and attack the opponent's knight. Black can play knight b3, threatening to capture the a1 rook. After rook a to b1, black can play knight d2, defending the knight and attacking the b1 rook and the c4 pawn. After rook b to c1, black can play rook a2, invading with the rook on the second rank. The white pieces are almost immobile, and black has a winning strategic advantage. In the game, after the move knight c5, white played knight f3, activating the knight and threatening to capture the e5 pawn. Black played rook takes a1, exchanging a pair of rooks. After rook takes a1, black played knight takes b3, capturing a pawn and threatening to capture the opponent's rook. White played rook a3 to defend his rook and attack the opponent's knight. Black played rook d1, invading with his rook on the first rank. Now, knight takes e5 is not possible, since black plays knight d2, threatening to capture on f1, and black wins. In the game, after the move rook d1, white played rook takes b3, capturing the black knight. But black played bishop takes c4 and is threatening to capture the bishop on f1, which cannot move because it is pinned. White played knight d2, defending the bishop on f1 and threatening to capture the bishop on c4. Black played rook takes f1, check. After knight takes f1, black played bishop takes b3, and white resigned. A very instructive game. Now that you have learned a very simple system of play in the old King's Indian defense, there is one more video you should watch, but hardly anyone will tell you about it. Click on the following video to complete your training. See you in the next video.